The Ultimate Question, Doctor Who. Hello out there, I'm the oldest nerd, and in this episode of Doctor Who, we have the Timeless Children. And this goes back to the entirety of how we know the Doctor. In the early series of William Hartnell, they didn't know where he was from. He was a doctor and a mysterious individual. They don't know where he was from or why he was there or what he was doing. And this continued on until they established in David Troughton's time that there was Gallifrey and that there are a race of people called the Time Lords. And into the Tom Baker era, they had the Brain of Morbius. It was supposed to be kind of a Frankenstein type of story in which having the Doctor captured and put under a brain scan, it shows the previous incarnations that we know about plus 8 others. They used pictures of people who were on the production staff in order to create some of the Doctor's prior lives prior to what we know of him. And they used that again in this episode, which was a nice little Easter egg back to the Brain of Morbius. Also, the Matrix, I think, was first mentioned in a Tom Baker episode as well, in that the Matrix was all of the collection of the knowledge of the Time Lords. And what we find out here and what the Master lures the Doctor into is a look into the Matrix. He has looked into everything that's there and is now telling her her own story. Now, you've seen the story, you know that the mystery of the timeless child has been solved, and the story that we thought that we knew of the Time Lords is completely different. And what this does effectively is it takes us back to the point that the Doctor is mysterious. And maybe that's a problem that happened as the series went on. We knew so much about the Doctor. The Doctor came from a planet that was made up of Time Lords that only had 12 regenerations, and they mostly stayed out of other affairs, and the Doctor was a renegade who stole a TARDIS and went off trying to do good. What we find out in this episode was that in the Doctor's wiped memories, which were filtered through this story of Brendan, which was excerpted last week, we find that the Master put those stories into her mind that came from the Matrix. And the Matrix has a filter there that was put in by someone, we suspect by Tectuum, who was mentioned early in the episode. And it was a way to maybe hint the Doctor that there was something beyond what she remembered, but not so overt as to give up the secret nature of what had been erased from the Matrix. And so even the Master didn't know in certain parts of the Matrix, even though he absorbed pretty much all of it. And the Doctor herself now is left with some kind of blanks in her previous lives. But we have now the ability now to consider her much more mysterious. The Time Lords were all kind of a genetic engineering scam. The 12 regenerations was something they just decided on. And the Timeless Child is part of another race that we have not seen or encountered from way beyond Gallifrey and way beyond our universe. So this is something that probably will provide a garden of quite fertile soil that future stories can be drawn from. The story on the surface, of course, is of the Cybermen and the Master getting involved with them in order to have a race that will blot out all life in the galaxy, including his own, he was hoping, because he is kind of self-destructive. A friend of mine was telling me that that's kind of the nature of the relationship between the Master and the Doctor. The Doctor is probably as crazy as the Master is, but just it manifests itself in different ways. The Master is self-destructive, and the Doctor is always running away from something and doing good turns on the way. They do kind of meld this together with what we know already. For instance, in The Deadly Assassin, where the Doctor goes back and has kind of flashbacks of his childhood, they make some reference as to becoming a Time Lord, and evidently the Gallifreyans, or they were called Sheboygans, were only humanoid until they had the special treatment in order to make them Time Lords. And so not everybody on the planet were Time Lords, only the elite were, and the elite were chosen. And the Doctor apparently had those that she was a different species altogether, and that with the memories that were placed, not actually placed because the master admitted that the two of them that went together to the academy and grew up together actually did happen, but it just wasn't the first thing that ever happened. And of course, the Doctor overcomes this by realizing that she is not just a confused person by all of this happening, not blown away by it, as it were, but even more important than she thought she was before. And so this puts a new confidence in the Doctor that we've been kind of losing ever since kind of the Matt Smith era, and certainly through the Capaldi era, and somewhat of this Doctor as well. So a very mind-blowing, to use their own term, episode. Of course, a twist at the end, and we've got to figure out how she gets out of this before Revolution of the Daleks will come near the end of the year, either Christmas or New Year's Eve or something along that line. But we know there'll be one other 2020 episode that will be aired near the end of the year. And then sometime in 2021, a new season. So much to unload in all of this. I think we'll leave much of that to our discussion in the forums. They did bring up, I noticed, Transmat again. They were talking about teleporters in previous episodes, and this one they went back to calling it a Transmat aboard the cyber ship. So all of these things make some interesting conversations. So I hope that you will join us in the comments below and let me know what you think of this episode, and if it doesn't put some new life into future episodes of Doctor Who. So in the meantime, we will have one more Picard episode this week, and then the one next week, as we talked about before, will be delayed a few days. But until we talk to you again, don't go far.